limiting what's out there about you in some ways is good. You have to decide what's right for you and your family and business, because whether you like it or not, your business and family are both connected.
You are listening to the Mindful Business Security Show, brought to you by Fosivity, where we answer your questions and simplify information security for small businesses. Get the clarity you need to focus on the things that matter.
Well, hello. You're listening to the Mindful Business Security Show. I'm your host, Accidental CISO. I know I say this every time, but we really do have another great episode for you today. If you haven't already, make sure that you subscribe so you don't miss the next one. We're going to be talking about open source intelligence, or OSINT, as it's referred to by those in the field. Please share this episode with anyone in your network that you think would benefit from the conversation and answers with our callers' questions. Like many of us in the cybersecurity field, our guest host today is predominantly self-taught. She was motivated to enter the field after a family member was scammed. These days, she's a professional OSINT investigator. Day to day, she works with nonprofits and aid organizations to train clinic defenders, journalists, doctors, nurses, and other public figures to protect themselves with better security and privacy practices. Later this year, not counting the novels that she ghostwrites, she'll release 2 books, one on social engineering and the other on social media privacy. When she isn't helping clients and writing books, she spends time with her horses, learns languages, and enjoys good wine. Who doesn't, right? Though I assume all not at the same time. Thank you for joining me on the podcast today. Welcome to the show, Shannon Miller.
Hello.
Hello. Man, it is great to meet you. I know we've chatted on Twitter and that sort of thing, but I think this is the first time we've ever actually spoken like live.
Yes. We exchange angry tweets and comments about all things that are going wrong this week. But yes.
Before we dive into the topic today, OSINT, tell me about your horses.
So I have 2, and I have a mare and a gelding, and Devonessa is the mare, and then Magic is the gelding. So we kind of have a joint ownership with Magic. So he's not primarily just mine. Somebody else co-owns him. And then Devonessa is all mine. I've had both of them for about 10 years, I want to say, almost 10 years now. So, and before that, I had another horse. And so I've had horses since I was about 25. My parents didn't get me a pony, so I decided as an adult, I asked for it under the tree every year and they didn't want to give me one. So I decided as an adult, I was going to have, large 1,200-pound children. So that's how I ended up with the horses.
Do you live somewhere where you can have them there with you, or do you have to board them?
So I board, but I've been very lucky the last few years. I moved them closer to home. So they're about 5 to 10 minutes away from me by car. So it's really not that bad. Even if it snows, I could still get there. It's a couple miles down the road. I kind of live at a place where I live in Northern Virginia. So there's tons of horse facilities here. It's very much Virginia itself is I think a $9 billion horse industry in the US between show jumping and hunters and all that. I don't do any of that. I used to do eventing, but now I do. Yeah, I used to compete, not anymore. I'm too old for that now. It hurts too much. I do it for pleasure, not for pain. And they're wonderful. They kind of, everyone has their form of therapy in their mind. So
my dad had horses when he was young, and my aunt, much later, longer in life, was still very active and had her horse that I don't remember how old her horse was when it finally passed away, but it was probably almost 30 years old, because I didn't really remember a time that she didn't have that horse. So yeah, they
can live a long time. It's a lifestyle choice, kind of like dog people. Once you have a dog, you always have a dog. Even if you don't have the same dog, horse people, dog people, cat people, we're animal lovers, no matter what kind or shape they come in. And so we just appreciate the companions that we're given and partners that we're given in life. So
very cool. All right, so OSINT, this is a really fascinating part of the cybersecurity field. It's a very broad field, cybersecurity is, and OSINT is just, one of the fascinating pieces. It's all fascinating, but one of the fascinating pieces here. It's a term that our audience of small business owners, small business leaders may not be familiar with, though. Can you talk a little bit about what we mean when we say open source intelligence?
So I try to explain it like this. Open source intelligence is all the information that you can find that is publicly available most of the time. So like publicly available on the internet via public means, public websites, web searches, tools that you use to look over websites, things like that. So for the lay person, for the end user that's never done it, think of it like another way of collecting information on people that you're curious about. For example, if in my business, we deal mostly with harassment and stalking cases. So we deal with online harassment, targeted harassment, everything from political figures to private citizens or domestic violence victims. So say they're being targeted by something on the internet, you're trying to figure out who's stalking them, who's harassing them. And the way that you do that is by conducting an investigation using open source methods, using methods and practices that are available openly on the internet. So instead of thinking it like intelligence in the traditional sense, where you're gathering through foreign sources or domestic sources or human sources, open source investigation isn't just human, it's also public databases and lists. And it could be, back in the day, it was phone books. You could look people up there, but now you find all of those things on the internet. So there's all those people lookup search engines. Those are things where you can find, data aggregation sites where you find information about people. That's all part of open source investigation. Does that help?
Yeah. And so, when I think of security, I think when a lot of people think of security, they think of the defensive side primarily.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have folks that you might pay to come and run a penetration test. Basically, you pay them to test your security. That's a more offensive. But it sounds like your part of the field, in a way, is from a defensive perspective, but you're using more offensive techniques for this, like reconnaissance and discovering information and research.
I mean, yes, I would say it's a little bit of both. So I don't do open source on friends and family. I don't do open source on people on Twitter that I'm mutuals with. I don't do it unless I'm paid to do it because I operate under a very strict set of guidelines of ethics, legal standards, and best practices for open source research. If you hold any sort of licenses or if you do any sort of private investigation, which I do, which you have to have a license to do in every state, you want to be very, very careful to maintain the ethical framework of what you're doing and how you're conducting your research. So a lot of people just do open source, for funsies, but like in my mind, that's work, and you got to do it ethically because the drawback to it is, what if you're called as a witness in a court case? What if you are trying to obtain evidence for a client who is working with an attorney and you to gain information? So your best bet is to always understand the legal and ethical implications of what you're doing and why. That's why I say it's both offensive and defensive, because you're looking at it from a perspective. You're also protecting your six. You're watching out for yourself and making sure you're not wading into waters that could get you into trouble.
It almost sounds also like very similar in some ways to incident response then that we talked about in the show that just came out recently, where, you're trying to investigate and figure out what happened and how somebody did something and that sort of thing. So there we got parallels there as well.
It's a lot of those things. And the government tends to be a little bit, I'm speaking on government. I'm a former federal government official, so I speak as a former Fed. But when we're talking about OSINT for government, they're just now getting to the place where open source investigators who've been doing it in the private sector for years and years, they're just coming up to speed with what we're doing now. They're just starting to hire OSINT investigators, researchers, really investing in open source intelligence. But they have legal restrictions as well because they can't investigate U.S. persons the way someone like me could. So I don't have to abide by quite the same standards as the government, but I do my best to stay within those boundaries and respect that only certain things can be used, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Everybody that works in cybersecurity has this unique path. And we talk about this in the very first episode of the show, actually, that there's no just one path that people come into cyber by. And that's, when small business owners are looking to hire folks, that's one of the challenges that they have is understanding what kind of background that person should have, because we as cyber professionals have such varied backgrounds typically. What has your journey been like then as you began exploring this field and then decided to turn your attention to it full time?
So it was nice and twisty. In college, I studied European studies, French, minor in Spanish. I got a master's in public policy. So my trajectory was always headed towards government work and public policy and international relations. At least that's where I thought I would end up. I'm one of the few people I know who actually used the degree that I went to school for. But I used my French, I used my public policy, which is great. But, government, it doesn't pay great. And they tend to, you have the boom and bust cycle of government where they hire a bunch of people and then they can lay you off. They can't. And unfortunately, like there's some security in it, but not as much as there used to be. And there's not as much. I didn't leave for the money. That wasn't my point. But, I made choices about where I wanted to go in my career. So I ended up going to the private sector after I worked in the Foreign Service for a few years. I was a diplomat overseas and all of that. But so that's kind of like how I went into my main career. I was doing contracting, defense contracting, and then I ended up Department of State. And then I ended up going private sector, working for Hewlett-Packard for a few years as a research analyst. And then I came into OSINT when one of my family members got involved in one of those bromance scams overseas. And we ended up doing OSINT to track down the person. And yeah, that's a whole other story. But yes, that's kind of how I got here. That's my circuitous route. But yes. So, we put together a whole OSINT file. This is my first OSINT investigation. I was like trying to figure out who this person is because they were giving a fake name and fake phone numbers. They had my family member convinced that they were real and that there was a whole team of them scamming my family member.
And it's so difficult too on the internet with the anonymity that it provides. And like you can make things up and you can, post fake misinformation to help support. And it's really difficult to determine what is real and what is not. So
what's real and what's not. And, people put together fake accounts to do OSINT like I do, our sock puppet accounts where they've created multiple personalities, literally multiple personalities on the internet. We've been at this a long time, but for even somebody new, catfishing, we all know what that is. We all know what phishing scams are. Like they're getting more sophisticated. They're getting better. And they're becoming even harder to detect with, deep fakes and AI now. And you're dealing with a lot more headwinds than we are used to. And trying to keep up is challenging.
I bet. So your two books that are coming out this year, one on social engineering and one on social media privacy. It sounds like an incredible amount of work to write two books and have them both release in 1 year.
It is. And I've had a 6-month setback on one and printing delays on the other one. So like one I'm working with, I was asked by Wiley Press to submit a book proposal. So that's kind of what we're working through right now with the social media privacy one. So this is just an expansion of a book I've already written, which was in ebook form. And I pulled off the web so that I could refine it and expand it into more of a textbook. So what it's going to be looking at is kind of helping families, teens, and college students kind of manage their online privacy a little bit better, their digital footprint, understanding the implications of being online. Because like most Gen Zers they grew up with the internet. They grew up with being online all the time, but not understanding how it's all connected. And, they're very tech savvy, but they don't seem to care about privacy. And now we need to impart on them why it matters. A lot of them grew up with their parents posting them online without the option to say no. So it's understanding how we're going to protect them from all of the scary things out there, including cases of sextortion, CSAM. I've had more cases of that in the last 5 years than I've had ever before. It's getting worse, not better. So I know that's not a great thing to lead with, but so the point of the social media privacy, this expansion for Wiley would be to really give better tools to parents and teens to help manage their online presence and to also help manage it if something happens to you. Because, we've had COVID, we've had a pandemic, and now we're dealing with issues of what do we do with our digital estate? Because it's part of our record of who we were and part of our legacy. What do we do with it if we pass? What happens if a parent dies unexpectedly or your child, for God forbid, or something happens to you? And, a parent, how do you manage all those data records? How do you manage all of the digital assets? These are all part of who we are. So this is really kind of addressing all of those points, and it's a lot to cover, but it's going to probably be like 500 pages. So it's big. I'm hoping we can cut it down a little bit. But they're like, we can always cut. That was my point. I was like, you can always cut stuff, just type and write. So that's that one. And then the social engineering, I have very mixed feelings about doing a book on social engineering because I feel like let's define what it is. Let's not cause harm, but let's make people aware of what it can do, the power of it, but also the trade-offs of it, if we will.
Sure. Yeah, we haven't done an episode on it. And, again, our audience may not know that term. So, yeah, we should.
The way that I define or think about social engineering is kind of like hacking humans or getting humans to do things that they maybe don't know they're doing. It's a form of, some scammers use it to phish people on the phone. Sometimes they use it in like SIM swapping cases where they'll get your number ported to a new phone. They'll pretend to be you. They'll get enough information about your identity, like your name and your phone number and your family members and your dog's first name. And they'll know enough about you to call your phone company and transfer your number over to them. And then they have access to all your accounts, because if you have your account secured by SMS message or text message to verify your identity, they now have your phone number and access to all your accounts via your phone. So social engineering in and of itself is just a way, it's a form of manipulation. I don't know any other nice way to put it, but it's also understanding the good it can do, and it's understanding the bad it can do. So I think for writing a book about social engineering, you have to talk about manipulation, you have to talk about neuro-linguistic programming, and you have to talk about how we apply it.
Okay. Wow, man, that's a lot of ground to cover in those two books. I read really slow. Are you going to do like a children's book version of all of this for me?
I am. I've been asked more than once to do like a teen, like specifically for teens or tweens, like that age that's using the internet and Roblox and gaming apps and all of that. Like parents are begging for it. I'm like, okay, so where can I fit that in between book 1 and book 2? Maybe I can pull like 5 chapters out of one book and put it into like a shorter manual version that people can just download.
My kids are going to need this. They're young, 9 and 11. They're just coming into that age where this stuff is going to start becoming incredibly important.
It's overwhelming. It's absolutely it's overwhelming for adults. I cannot even imagine what it's like for kids. You were born with a phone in one hand and an iPad in the other. So it's like you've got your tablet, you've got a laptop, you've got devices at school, you've got, your friend groups, you've got your messenger apps. I can't even keep up. And half the time I feel like, very old now, because everybody's like, have you heard of this app? I'm like, no, that doesn't sound familiar. No, please tell me about it. I'm not cool anymore.
Right. I used to know things. That's why my dad is famous for saying, like, there's suddenly been an alarming increase in the number of things I know nothing about. Like, I no idea where that actually originated from, but like, that's something I remember my dad saying as I was younger, and I never quite understood it. And like now, like, it's very real. Very difficult to keep up when this stuff moves that fast. So to like everything in those books and stuff, the hundreds and hundreds of pages that you have to write, like if there was one thing that you wanted to make sure that every small business owner or leader understood about OSINT, what would that one thing be?
I think OSINT, like anything else, can be abused. It can be used for good or it can be used for bad. And I think understanding the risks and the rewards of it is really important before you venture into a career or decide that it's what you want to do. Because once you know certain things, you can't unknow them and you can't unsee them. So at some point in your OSINT journey, if you decide to be a practitioner or a researcher, you will encounter things that will horrify you. You will encounter things that surprise you. You will encounter things that you didn't think people did. So if you're approaching it from a framework of being ethical and, I don't want to say morally centered, but like everyone has their kind of own moral compass. Like I try to operate from a place of trust and authenticity with my clients and with people that I work with. And that's not always the case. So I try to impart that on other people doing the work. But again, everyone has their own journey. And so like the piece that I would impart to people is like, be careful about the choices you make if this is what you actually want to do. And, maybe it's not for everyone, because like it becomes, people start asking you to like, oh, can you like Google this person? No, I can't. I would rather be surprised. I would rather be surprised by somebody telling me their story than me finding it on the internet, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely does. And, your comment about, that you see things when you're doing these investigations that you can't unsee. I think kind of the flip side about that too, again, for small business owners from their perspective, like you put things out there and once they're there, you can't pull them back. Like, I know that there's, right to be forgotten laws and things in some places, but like the reality of that is like once that's out there, you can't pull it back. So same way you can't unsee something, it's like you can't unpublish something. Once it's been out there and seen and downloaded and copied, you've lost control of that information.
Risk and reward to everything.
Yes. So Shannon, it's been good talking about OSINT and kind of laying the foundation for our listeners of what OSINT is. I've got some callers here on the line that have some question for us. Are you ready to go to the phones, take some calls?
Sure. Yeah.
Awesome.
Do the cybersecurity risks to your business have you confused? Visit Focivity.com/podcast. That's FOCIVITY.com/podcast and sign up to be a caller on a future episode.
So our first caller here today is Mike from San Diego. Hey, Mike, welcome to the show. How can we help you?
Well, the big buzzword these days, Chat GPT. Everyone's heard about it. It's all over the place. AI, it's overwhelming. My question is, how do you perceive Chat GPT and AI in general changing data availability for small businesses and the OSINT data that's out there and the processing?
That's a very loaded question, and I think it will only time will tell how we handle this. I think like anything in tech, we like to move fast and break things, and we didn't think about the long-term ramifications of regulation for something like AI. I think there's a lot of power in it. I think there's a lot of good things that could come from it. But in terms of OSINT, I think it's already muddying the waters with data. And because I've been testing and researching, I've been downloading like white papers all day, reading about AI and how it's going to affect the OSINT landscape and research and authenticity of small businesses and their data, right? So we're looking at it from the perspective of there's a bunch of people making, crappy Chat GPT articles and putting them on the internet from their small business, and it's all saying the same thing. So right now we're in the dawn of AI, really. It being, so commonplace that everyone kind of is talking about it. It's the latest, like you said, buzzword. So we have some tools available. There's, back in my college days, we had plagiarized detectors, like plagiarism. You would submit your paper to the plagiarism detector looking for common words. Now we have a similar thing that some institutions have built, like MIT and has partnered with Harvard and another researcher from IBM Watson to create an AI detector. So it's like you input some words from your article to see if it's human-made or if it's, made by like a chat AI. So these are somewhat helpful. Now, it doesn't catch everything. It catches some things, but like they're only as good as the data on which they're built. So if you've worked in any type of IT, you know that data is biased, and so the AI is biased. So you don't necessarily have enough knowledge and bandwidth to understand what we're against yet, if that makes sense. So for small business purposes, I would say verify anything that you are creating or anything that you are having done for your company using AI. Like verify that it's not the same article hasn't been sold to multiple companies created with an AI. Because I know there's writers out there submitting articles written by Chat GPT, and I'm like, okay, but it's not great. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's really interesting because I had thought about the risks of AI for making it easier to go do reconnaissance against a small business, but I hadn't considered the risk of small businesses being charged for social media content and other things that is not original, not what they're expecting, being written by AI, being sold multiple times to other people.
Generated by AI. Yep. And being sold to multiple companies. So like you're getting scammed.
That's a totally different risk vector than I had even considered. Wow.
I guess a larger concern that I've seen is open source counterintelligence. You see all sorts of information being put out there, and like you said, this AI generated. What do we need to be concerned about as far as competitors putting misinformation about our business?
Okay, so there's disinformation and there's misinformation. So there's slightly different things, but in terms of misinformation, that's intentionally malicious, not true information, right? In most forms. Disinformation is the information that has a grain of truth in it. So if we pull a thread, there's a line of truth in what we said. Everything else is extra. So when we do disinformation, it's like it's true enough that it could be real. So that's the stuff we're worried about. We are worried about misinformation, but sometimes we want that. You know, if it's good information, then yay. But what you're looking at is like detection through OSINT means of ChatGPT style AI is still pretty easy if you look at some of the, depending on what's entered when they go to create the piece about like whatever article or whatever they're writing or whatever they're researching or whatever they're asking the chat AI, there's certain limitations based on how the AI is set up. If there is a policy in place that says, I can't do that, I'm AI, right? So somebody was thinking with ChatGPT, there's certain limitations on what the AI tool will do, but that's only until it gets more capable and a smarter model. So in terms of misinformation, that's going to be up to OSINT to kind of develop terms of how we deal with that and how we find it. But right now you can find error messages in the ChatGPT code, enough of them. There's certain key phrases that you can look for that will show up in like fake reviews, in scam reviews of a business, for example. Like let's say somebody's trying to create a Yelp review for their business and they have 5-star reviews and the restaurant is great and everyone loves it and the sushi's so fresh. Yeah. Meanwhile, the sushi smells, is old, and no one wants to eat it. There's certain lines in those fake reviews that people pay for that like you can find certain keywords in the ChatGPT code. And I refer to ChatGPT because it's the most common one that people are using right now to do these fake reviews on Amazon products and Yelp reviews and like healthcare reviews even. So for like hospitals, there's even hospitals using them now. So looking for certain keywords that like would generate repeated reviews that are very similar, but just different enough to seem original. You're looking for pattern language. And unless you're schooled in looking for patterns, which most OSINT investigators are, we learn to recognize pattern language. We learn to recognize how people speak, because everyone speaks with a certain cadence, flavor, language, not even accents when you type. Like certain people have certain personality traits. Like when everyone knows if I'm tweeting, they know exactly what I'm going to say and how I'm going to say it because I have a certain personality type. But people creating fake reviews have the same thing. So when you get like those follow farms and those, fake review farms, they're all the same thing. But that's not going to be forever. That's just right now. So does that help a little bit?
Yes, that does.
And I think, small business being careful what information they do put out about themselves is going to, I mean, it's a huge rabbit hole. And the truth is there's not a whole lot you can do about what other people do on the internet and the scale and speed that things like AI allow them to operate at. Like, I mean, you can set up, Google alerts for your business's name and, your name and these things to get notified when stuff pops up and Google indexes something new about you or about your business. But then but then you have to do something about it if it's untrue or something damaging that you need to have taken down. And we have, some states now have privacy laws that you may be able to put like a data subject request into a company to say, hey, this information's about me, but it's incorrect and you need to take this down. And you may be able to work through some of those channels, but a business operating on a business name, that's not a person. You may have the same kind of protections.
That's where you're going to probably end up hiring a brand management though. Like you'd probably want reputation and brand management. So like you would be dealing, it's basically a PR disaster. So what you're looking for is a PR company. You're looking for a firm that's dealt with this, that has lawyers on staff to help with DMCA takedown requests, because it is violation of your rights. If somebody is speaking poorly of you, basically your goal is to bury the Google results or get them deleted.
Of course, the concern with that as a small business, we don't have the budgets that large enterprises, large corporations have. And yeah.
And incident response is very expensive, whether you're getting hacked or, I mean, this is kind of like getting hacked. This is incident response still, but it's external to your system, and you got to have a plan and know how you're going to respond to that. So I think that's something that a lot of small businesses don't think about is their IR plans need to have this brand management component to it, like reputational repair and all that. And if you're using frameworks like, NIST CSF or SOC 2, like those frameworks have some of these components built in that you do have some plans in place for those. But without them, you're reinventing all of these processes on the fly at the worst possible time. So I think, small business, one of the things that they really ought to do, other than setting up those alerts, is like have a plan in place and at least know who you're going to call when those alerts fire and it's something that's bad and that you need to get ahead of so that you can do that quickly. Awesome. Well, thanks, Mike. This has been good talking with you. Good questions. I appreciate it. Good discussion.
All right. Well, I appreciate you having me.
Yeah. Thank you for coming on the show. Appreciate it. Our next caller on the line here is Mark from Denver. Mark, how are you doing today? Thanks for coming on the show.
I'm well, thank you.
Yeah. How can we help you?
So I am curious for the solopreneurs, the company of 1, 2, or 3, where you are the face of the company or you are the company, a service provider type company. How does one begin to balance any kind of security, privacy, best practices for not having too much out there with the fact that I need to be widely and easily findable?
Oh, such a loaded question. They're never just like one yes answer. So for someone like myself, who is also a, quote unquote solopreneur, I run a shop with a small admin team and a few contractors. So we are the face of our business. And it's this very fine balance between how much do I put out publicly available about myself and how far are people willing to go to find me. Now, in my case, I deal with stalking and harassment, so that's a little bit different, but it's also the same because it's existing online is dangerous for certain people, women, minorities, all of us, to a certain degree, because people, I don't know if you know this, but some people are crazy. And you've probably had at least one client or customer where you knew before you took them on as a client or customer that you were like, I don't know if this is the right client for me. And then after you got them, you couldn't get rid of them, and or they went from being like, yeah, this is really great money, to you immediately regretting taking that person on because you knew they were going to be the pain in your ass that you do not deserve. So, and that type of person, when they're unhappy or like vindictive or not excited about your service anymore or think you're not providing what you said you were going to provide, tend to be the ones who leave you the worst reviews, who don't want to pay you, and who can also, when you're done with them, even if you end things on good terms, sometimes will, send you a nasty gram in the mail. So in those respects, I would say limiting what's out there about you in some ways is good. You have to decide what's right for you and your family and business, because whether you like it or not, your business and family are both connected. The way that your family is connected to you and the way you feel about that and the way that they're influenced by what you do. Like if you're very present on social media, you're very present online, or you go to a lot of conferences and a lot of people know you, everything you do in your personal life gets reflected in your business. So it's about balancing the safety of both yourself, your family, your business, and your own privacy and your right to have not everyone know everything about you. So it's a very personal decision. And I preface all of these things by saying it depends. And I hate that answer, but it's very true because I don't know your particular situation or context or what feels right for you or what you're comfortable with. But, my name is out there. All my social media links are there. If you go looking, you'll find things. And my favorite thing is when people find me, I'm like, oh my God, you have like this kind of page. And I'm like, yes, I do. Thank you for sending me to my own social media. I appreciate you. There's no there. We already know who I am. So for purposes of our business, it's our marketing. We're the face of the brand. So what I would suggest is data removal for some of your like personal information, like your home address, if you're using your home address, like you have a home office, maybe getting a PO box or a virtual PO box so that you have all your business and mail go to that address, so that if the address is bought up by a data aggregation service, that's the address that's reflected in internet searches rather than your home address. So you could get a service like Delete Me, which it will go through and delete your mobile number, like your personal mobile number and your address from databases. So every time they sell your database, like your database information to another company, Delete Me will go through and just, you pay for like a year and they'll go through and just delete you out of a bunch of those databases. That can help minimize some of the like private stuff. I don't think you want anyone showing up at your house. I feel like that's a bridge too far. So does that help a little bit?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
My work is at my house. So
something else too, where, you can have conversations with, close friends and family members too about this, and just, let them know, like, this is, my sort of risk model that I'm dealing with. Like these are the things that I'm concerned about with my life and my business and separation. How you can help me with this is not posting pictures of me online, not tagging me on Facebook. Like, maybe they're welcome to post pictures if they were on vacation with you, but just don't tag me in them. And just those types of things. Like, you may be able to get, kids and aunts and uncles and cousins and whoever to kind of do those things to help you. And I like the idea of using a different address. I've got a family member who's retired law enforcement, retired police chief, for instance, and who on his driver's license and a lot of other things, like, had the department's address on it so that people couldn't somehow find him and find home addresses. Like, he's had to be very, very careful over a long period of time of what information to put out there because of that career path, not even using his name, but because, his name is on the the badge, nameplate. And in law enforcement, like, they piss people off for a living. Practically it's oversimplification, of course, but like, a lot of people aren't happy with their interactions because, it's just the way it goes. And so I think that was one of the things that he was always very clear with family about is, please don't post my picture. Please don't tag this. If somebody did, please, pull it down or crop it different so that I'm not in it or whatever. And that helped, I think, quite a bit. And so that's something you may be able to do as well to help limit what gets out there so that you've got more control and can be very mindful about what you put out there specifically about you and your business, and you can curate what's being published. Because we were talking earlier in the show about how once things are out there, they're out there, and they're very, very difficult, if not impossible, to pull back.
So for an uninitiated newbie in this subject, is there something or some things that you think a person who doesn't know a whole lot of anything here should, hey, go take a look at this, or hey, here's something to potentially be aware of, stop doing?
Okay, so specifically for your business or specifically for like a personal safety perspective, just so that I can be clear?
Yeah, how about for business?
Okay. So from a business perspective, we were talking about reputation management. So you're going to want to go through your social media accounts and make sure that your business profile is separated from your personal profile so that you have your business accounts, whether it's your bank accounts or your addresses or your social media or your LinkedIn or whatever, that you have those completely separate because you don't want to cross-contaminate the two, right? You want to have your business wholly separate from your personal stuff. So from a liability perspective as well, I don't know if you're carrying liability insurance, but or you run an LLC or an S Corp. I don't know what your structure is or in your state, but it's a little bit different in every state. But make sure that you're carrying, looking at a liability policy, professional or general liability, to ensure that if somebody comes after your business, they're not going to be suing your personal assets. They'll be coming after your business assets instead. That's a layer of protection we don't think about as insurance. But also cyber risk insurance may be something to consider. Because if you handle any sort of highly sensitive personal information of clients, you are responsible for the processing of that information. You're responsible for the storage of that client information, and you're expected to operate under certain legal guidelines for how you protect it. So I won't get into all the details of it, but I'm sure you have a business lawyer advising you on your documents and your whatever process you went through to set up your business. You have somebody advising you of the basic structure and what you have to abide by. So yeah, from like security hygiene, make sure you're using good, strong passwords. I know that sounds stupid, but it's true. If you can use a password manager, that's even better. If you have multi-factor authentication on your accounts, like your social media accounts, using a security app or using SMS if you can, whatever you've got available, anything's better than nothing. You don't want to be the low-hanging fruit for somebody coming after you, like a hacker, somebody like me. Personally identifiable information that you put on your socials. So like limit what you share, double check your privacy settings on your social media accounts or what you're posting on LinkedIn. These are all things to protect your business and to protect your identity a little bit. These are just small things that you can do. You don't have to do them all at once. If you do one of them a month, you're doing better than most people. Even security people are very bad about doing these things. I am terrible at changing my passwords, but I work very hard to make sure that I have multi-factor authentication, that I have all of my stuff separate, that I limit what I put out there. There's enough out there, but not too much. What else? Do you have like specific questions about what you should and shouldn't post, or are you more like just general security practices?
I think those were great issues. You know, I'm very much at the state of you don't know what you don't know, and I think your password example is a great one, right? Like, you should have a strong password. Well, of course I should. So it's good to have those reminders. I was making a note for myself for cybersecurity insurance. You know, I have E&O coverage. I have liability coverage.
You would be amazed how many people don't.
Yeah, agreed.
It makes my skin crawl. It upsets me physically because I'm thinking, what if they come after your babies? What if they come after your kids or your wife and her business, if she has one, or a career, or whatever? Like, what if they come after your assets? What if somebody sues me? That's my worry. So these are the things that keep me awake at night. Not that somebody's going to come to my house. No. It's that somebody's going to take my money that I've earned, right? So the other thing I was thinking about is, just one more thing from work before I forget. If you have any sort of contracts, NDAs, documents that you sign, use encryption. Use encryption on transfer of your documents. Don't send them over open email. Like, use something like DocuSign, or there's a bunch of other you can use encrypted document signatures. Like, that way everything is end-to-end encrypted. You can both sign the contract or whatever, because we're all sending contracts and we're all doing NDAs and we're all doing consultation agreements and scopes of work. Just make sure whatever sort of system you use to store the documents is encrypted, and however you send the documents is encrypted. We could do a whole episode on that, but that's something like, oh, I'll just send this contract. No, that contract has your name and your address and like your bank account information. Don't do that.
And cyber insurance too. Like, we could almost do a whole episode just on cyber insurance and what people are seeing with getting that. And cyber insurance often will have brand damage, reputation recovery kind of coverage as part of it, because that becomes a big piece of, the restoration process and putting things back together afterwards. So as you go in and are looking at insurance, do consider cyber insurance. Like, as a small shop, it may not be terribly expensive. For larger companies, it is starting to get expensive, and the insurance companies are starting to scrutinize a lot more than they used to. But for a small shop, a 1-2 man, maybe 3-person shop or whatever, like, it I think is still attainable and can help with some of this stuff. And we talk a little bit about training. I think too, if you've got other folks that you work with, making sure that you've trained your other employees or contractors as well on this stuff, for just what kinds of things to and not to put on social media. Because if they're tied to the company in some way, like, they're always representing the company in some form or another. So incorporating some of that stuff into your, awareness training, or into your policy, a social media policy. And it doesn't have to be a legalese complex thing, but just, these types of things are okay to say, these types of things are, and just kind of give folks guidance on what they should and shouldn't post online. And, one thing that is really common, and I cringe every time I see it. It happens a lot on LinkedIn. People get a new job and they post a picture on their first day, and their employee badge is like either they're holding it up to the camera or it's like visible around their neck on a lanyard for somebody to look at and get all sorts of information off of. And now it's, again, open source information that's out there publicly on social media. So just thinking about little things like that you can kind of train and provide guidance to the team for what to post and what not to post can significantly reduce the amount of stuff that's being sprayed onto the internet inadvertently that you don't even really know about. Is that helpful, Mark? Do you have any other follow-up questions?
It is, yeah, thank you. I think that kind of covers my level of questions.
Excellent. Yeah, glad we could help. I really appreciate you coming on the show and asking your questions, because they were fantastic discussion around them, and I think it's going to be very, very valuable for our listeners.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Cool. So, Shannon, we had a couple folks come on and ask questions for us, and like I said, really good discussion. Any sort of key takeaways that you want to make sure that our listeners sort of walk away from this with, or anything you want to reiterate from the callers or the prior conversation?
Like we're talking about small businesses, so we're talking about end users, and we always want to think of the people who are not working in technology, who don't understand IT like we do, and make it easy. Make it as easy as we can. Even though security is complicated, even though it is hard, we have to make it easier and more accessible. So when I reminded, Mark about passwords, like that's such a basic thing that even we as IT professionals forget to change our passwords. We forget to use a password manager. We forget to put multi-factor authentication. We forget to use encryption. We don't use our privacy settings the way we could on our social media. Like just small things mean that you're not the low-hanging fruit. You're not the person that it's going to be a little bit harder to get to you, and it's going to be less of an effort like that they're going to go after you. So like if you can make it 5% harder for hackers, not the good ones, the bad ones, the criminals who want to steal your information, if you can make it just even 5 to 10% harder, they're going to give up a lot quicker. So the one other thing I was thinking of when we were talking to the callers was, though, we talk about social media, but we don't talk about phishing as much, like phishing scams coming through text messages and emails, which are so common. And even good people like you and me, we've been tricked by phishing emails. Even people that are aware of what's coming, we'll click on a link and all of a sudden we'll put in our information. We'll be like, oh no, and then we have to change. We're scrambling to call our bank and change our passwords and log out of our accounts and make sure our bank hasn't been hit and that we didn't give out a credit card number to the wrong person. And so even though we are very educated in these matters, we still get caught too. It happens to really smart people, really educated people. It can happen to anyone. So these are the risks to small businesses. These very common phishing scams, these very common text message phishing scams that happen with like tracking numbers, like those parcel code tracking numbers that you get in your text message, thinking it's a package from UPS and Amazon, and it's not. They look real. So I guess I would say don't beat yourself up if it happens to you, because it's happened to every single one of us. And it's not a matter of like if it will happen, it's a matter of when it will happen. So just having a little bit more knowledge, like Mark said, you don't know what you don't know. So knowledge is power. And the more you know, the more you can prepare, or at least when the worst thing does happen, you'll be ready or you'll have a plan. And that's the best way that I operate, is like, that's how I teach people safety, is like, okay, so the bad thing's going to happen and we can't stop the bad thing from happening. But instead of making it worst case scenario, we plan for best, middle, and worst case. And it's going to be somewhere in the middle.
Man, it's interesting to me, like things keep boiling down to the same themes in security, about like just being mindful and being vigilant, training and training and training, and people and people and people.
Making training accessible, but also interesting and also worth your time. It's hard. It's hard to make people care about this. It's so hard. If I could make people care as much as I care, my job would be so much easier, and so would yours.
Exactly. So as we're wrapping up here, where can folks find you online if they want to, look up what you're doing or reach out, or anything like that?
Well, I'm everywhere and nowhere all at once. You can find me on, I'm still on Twitter, the dying site. I'm trying to get away from there. I'm also on Blue Sky. I'm Lock Down Your Life on all platforms. So easy to find. I'm on TikTok. I'm on LinkedIn. You can go to my website, lockdownyourlife.com. That has all my links. And I'm usually pretty active on social media because I find that that's how people find me. So that's the best way to connect with me. I don't usually hand out my email address otherwise.
And your website, Lock Down Your Life.
Yes, lockdownyourlife.com. Yep. Mm-hmm.
I'll put the link in the show description. That's probably like if somebody's dealing with harassment and that kind of stuff and like needs to contact you for help, that's the best place to go.
That's probably the main place to go. Yep. There's a contact form on the site. I do not give out my phone number. I found bad things happen when you do that. So do not recommend. As a business, do not recommend.
Well, I want to thank you again for joining me on the show today, Shannon. It has been amazing having you here. I really hope our listeners found the discussion valuable and will share that with their friends and family too, because this is just such an important topic that we need to get the information out there. And as always, I want to give a huge thank you to you, our listeners. You make all the work we put in to do the show worth it. And I appreciate that you're listening right now today. So I am Accidental CISO. And until next time, stay mindful.
Don't miss our next episode. Be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app and follow us on social media. Visit Focivity.com/podcast. That's FOCIVITY.com/podcast for show information and links to our social media pages. This has been the Mindful Business Security Show, brought to you by Focivity. Tune in next time when we'll hear Accidental CISO say,
I hate the term best practices because best practices is like one of those hand wavy things that people that don't know what they're doing tend to say. But in a lot of ways, they kind of come down to like, this is really how you should be doing things.